Real quick, just the two guys that you'll ask about. Q Robinson has a bone bruise, so we rested him. We see him getting back into the fold Monday, and then a lot of that's just symptomatic. So, we think he'll begin to get some work next week, and the same thing with Dre. He felt a tweak. Fortunately, the scans were good. We're going to be smart with bringing him back, but we see him getting work and being a part of next week. We're fortunate there, and I think those were the two guys maybe that you would have asked me about. Today we had the officials again. Introduced 2-minute. The one thing that's interesting when the season ends and we're looking at our cut-ups, there's well over 150 snaps of 2-minute. When you think about it, every game at the end of the half, someone's in 2-minute offense or defense, and at the end of the game, someone's in offense or defense. And I would say situationally, it's probably A1 on what's most important. You have your goal line offense and defense, and that cut-up might be 12 plays or 14 plays on a year. But the significance of operating with a fixed amount of time on the clock, defending it and attacking it is extremely important. And, there's well over 200-300 different scenarios, timeouts, what you need. So we kind of go through all of those, and then analytically, that really impacts what we're thinking offensively and defensively. That situation, a minute 43, needing a touchdown, one timeout. At that moment, it's probably advantage defense on the 25. If it was needing a field goal, it would be advantage offense based on a timeout. So really just educating everyone relative to how you approach each 2-minute drill. They're different, and yet it's still 2-minute offense and defense. So that was introduced today. We got a walkthrough snap on a Hail Mary, and then, of course, our other periods. Any questions?
It was an exceptional day from Fonda on the defensive side. What is the end of your defense you guys have?
The interception was an RPO, and if you really looked at his distance from the throw, I'll bet it was like 8 yards. And so to be able to go up and catch that with a crowded look in front of him, it was. I'm anxious to see it on film. I saw it from behind the line of scrimmage. The one thing over the years, if I asked you to give us the best safeties that are in the Hall of Fame, the traits are always instincts and football smarts. Some are faster than others, but it's hard to be real effective at that position if you don't have those high football instincts. And certainly he brings that. And, we made a comment in the offseason, there's certain players, the ball finds them, and he's one of those guys. So that play was sick. And
we did see Bo turn it over a couple times for the first time. As a coach, is it hard and fast, hey, I still don't like to see turnovers?
Well, the play to Afunga, that's one where, you look at it, you talk about it, and then you're like, all right. And then I think there was one other.
Is there room for
on the film study, when you get a better look at it, that meeting might sound like, all right, here's the play. What are you thinking here? And then, hey, you got to be alert. Like there's one where Pat was floating back off. Sutton was on a double move, and it was just a location error, and you clean it up. And with that route, that the corner, same route we ran against Houston in the same field corner overlapped and made an interception. The young corner who's really good there against Russell. It was in what looks like an open receiver. It's understanding there's a blind area that ball can't go, and then it doesn't happen again. So
I guess what I'm asking is, even separate from those individual specific plays, in your mind as a coach, is there ever room for him to explore his game in a setting like this, or is it like, hey, if you wouldn't do it in the game, I don't want to see that?
I don't know that we're ever exploring meaning I think there's confidence in certain throws, and yet there's still a structure to each pattern, and then more than anything, it's the defensive deployment. A lot of times when the ball's being snapped, the experienced quarterback knows at that moment the most likely 1-2 combination based on the rotation, and so there's a lot of elimination that's taking place as you go to the line, post snap. All right, I'm over here, down to my back, and so sometimes you have a true progression read where you're just looking at receivers, but I understand your question, and yet I'm good with his current exploration.
John, obviously, a lot of flags, false start.
Yeah, listen, a lot of pre-snap, and I like that the officials are here, right? And they're gonna try to call it. And there's some points of emphasis this year, and so, man, I'd rather be diving into it right now than sit here and I told the players, I said, I don't want to turn and argue with the official. I've yet to see one of those win. I just want to make sure we understand what they saw and why they called it, period, and that's it. And so, there were 2 or 3 times we were too deep at tackle. In a game you get one warning, but we got to get that cleaned up. And then we had one period where it appeared that we had at least 3 false starts, and so it's easy to point to one. And then I grabbed the cues and I said, hey, let's make sure we're taking ownership in this. And some of them were check with me plays, but we got to get that cleaned up.
Sean, how do you balance a day where it looks like maybe the defense had a better day overall, especially in the run game, or a day when the offense has a better day, to complement one side but not be too down?
Well, that's where, as the offensive coach or the play caller, as the head coach, you separate yourself from that. And typically in training camp, there's some ebbs and flows. It's more concerning when throughout the whole camp it's one side. And so, part of that as the head coach is looking at what we did well defensively, and then also, hey, what are the things, the pre and the post snap fouls we have to eliminate. Now the in snap fouls are usually technique oriented. I got caught for a hold. I was a little behind on my block, but the pre snap and the post snap, those are ones that are on us. And go ahead.
I know you spoke well of LaVale Bailey a few days ago. How's he looked getting regular snaps now at linebacker?
Good. We were discussing him last night. He's very smart, and so for a second-year player at a position like that, it's night and day. Like where he's at today, and a year ago as an undrafted free agent where he was at. The special teams will be important. All those things where he can get on the field. But we've been impressed, and I'm glad we have him.
Coach, with the scrimmage format tomorrow, how much are you able to get from that practice, and how different do you design?
So the practice, we're still going to be up, full go up. And, phase 1, I'm just going to give you how it'll look. And you might remember from a year ago, phase 1 might start with 2 punts and then put the offense on the 25-yard line, and then in the script move the ball to different segments, 6 plays with the ones, back up, 6 plays with the 2s, the 3s. That ends a kickoff segment, maybe another special team segment, break, hydrate. All right, phase 2 would start midfield, and the ball would move, into the high red. It might start with punt cover, going in punt. Then we'd go to the defensive portion, and then we'd finish with kick return, 3 kick returns. Then take a break. Phase 3 would be in the red zone, and then finish. We'll run 3 2-point plays. It would start with maybe field goal block. It would end. So it's us the night before planning to some degree these situations, so we know we're going to get them, and yet it's going to be in the format of the practice is much different than what you've been seeing. We'll stretch and get going, and then pretty soon right into those 3 phases. We'll finish with a 2-minute. We'll finish with a Hail Mary, both sides. And so when it's over with, there's a lot of situational football that that you put yourself in. And that's what tomorrow's, it'll be around. I'm guessing last year we were around 2 hours on the field, but it was very similar to Saturday 2 years ago, and that's the plan for tomorrow.
Coach, during that 2 minutes today, a lot of versatility. You can see Evan Ingram looks like an 11 personnel, but could be 10 personnel, and then on the other side of the ball, you have John A. Barron and Shaquan McMillan to be able to.
Yeah, so
kind of versatility.
it's let's start on defense. The hardest thing defensively is to have enough cover people, and then when you do, you can add them to obvious passing situations and then match up. If Surtain wanted to take Ingram, you have that flexibility. And so it's dime. It gives the defense a lot of different coverage people that can execute when it's an obvious pass situation. And then, offensively, the big thing offensively is you have your first group, but you have to be ready on deep throw. You got to be ready to kind of hockey substitute, new fresh group in. Because one of the tough things about a 2-minute drill, if a play has a post and a sail and a flat, someone just ran a post route, and if we're going to wait for him to return as opposed to just exit and send it, so you have to be ready to substitute a little bit more offensively. And yeah, Evan, when Evan's in, we count it as 11. Just because he's not in a 3-point stance, we still count it as 11. The defense might say, hey, we're going to treat Ingram as a receiver. Certainly in this 2-minute drill, I didn't see any linebackers covering him. I saw, defensive backs, and we have that depth to do that. And that can vary week to week, relative to, you'll play some teams that are more man-based, more zone-based. And then I would say throughout the league, most 2-minute operations are out of an 11 personnel offense. And then, some may get into 10. You saw us in some empty. But that can vary by team.
Coach, when you look back at the 2-minute snaps from a year ago, what impressed you about kind of as a rookie, how he improved as the year went on?
Well, there's a poise. And the other thing is, and you can't underestimate the communication has to be like paramount, on point. In other words, we can't snap a ball with a receiver really who didn't get the call. The communication, on the road, it's going to be signals. But look, he's operated like, think about this. 20 years ago, the quarterback in our league in 2-minute, and the amount of change and the amount of the learning curve compared to today's quarterback who's in, a lot of these guys are operating no huddle. They're operating, they're using the clap cadence from college. But so they're much further along with spontaneous offense. And some of them are, middle of the first quarter. So I think that helps, especially a guy like him.
Coach, you just talked about Dre's participation next week. How much, if at all, will his history factor in how you handle it?
Well, it's always going to factor how we approach each practice. There's a few guys. We put together this load management plan for a lot of guys. There'll be some veterans that next week will have a day where they don't practice. He would be, in that category, and we'll be smart. Today, we certainly weren't going to do anything, but when I addressed you guys yesterday, I was hopeful. I had a pretty good idea, but the MRIs hadn't gotten back, and certainly was pleased with all the information we got. So we'll see how the exam is Monday and how his movement is, and it's right. It's not anything to do with the prior injury. It's right in his quad, but the news was good. So that is, how are the symptoms and ramping up, and we anticipate he'll definitely be part of our plan to go to San Francisco, and then how much we play or practice with. When you have a joint practice, you might get reps in that and then back off the game, or vice versa. We'll decide that by then.
Sean, on the Joker term, is this a term that you're using behind the scenes, like in meeting rooms with Evan? And at what point?
It's just something when we were trying to identify, the tight ends or running backs that are rare pass receivers. That'd be the definition, AI, Wikipedia. Tight ends and running backs that are rare receivers. And so, historically speaking, all right, I've had Sproles, I've had Bush, I've had Kamara, I've had Graham, Shockey, Ingram, is, and then the runners, none of them have gotten their wings yet, but Harvey's a candidate. Jaleel, he's been to Joker school now for 2 years. He has not gotten his wings. But you understand, so in one draft, Detroit landed a tight end and Gibbs, and we would defend them as both, and they are Joker threats. And so Kelsey, obviously you're going to look at as one of those Joker tight ends, and so they're hard to find. In other words, there'll be some drafts where there may only be one or two candidates and maybe a couple runners. But when you have them, man, when you think about where their catch radius is relative, because it's easy in our league to take a receiver away. I mean, it's very easy and it's easy to take an individual away. But when you have the interior tight end and halfback as threats like that, then it gives you a lot more options.
Coach, highly of Troy Franklin sort of through the offseason.
He's having a good camp.
What can he do now that he just what?
Well, I think he's so much more versed into the system, the routes. He's playing Z, but he's also playing slot. So he's working at two spots. And then I would say, man, his speed, and like you see his speed and runaway, and that you began to see, even in the Buffalo game, in the playoffs at Cincinnati, he can stretch the field. Marvin can stretch the field. And so some of the receivers are working one spot, and there's a handful. Bailey's working X to sub. Troy's working Z to sub. Bandy can play inside. He could play, all the spots, but his best spot is inside. So it's really trying to take the strengths of these players. But to your question, all the nuances, coming from Oregon where it's double, it's trips, it's double, there's so many different splits and formations that he is a lot further along on.
Coach, I saw you sign the final beam on that in the ceremony that they had today. How do you feel about that?
Well, it was up in that, there's an office up there. If you looked at the third floor above the weight room, like literally the building off, all the workers have an office, and they had that big piece of wood in the back, and everyone had signed it. And I guess there is a long-held tradition when buildings are being built. And so that last piece went up, I think, this morning. It's pretty good to watch. Look, my office faces it, and when the crane's going, like at times you could find yourself just like mesmerized watching, and then you're like, all right, I got to get back to watching tape. But like, all right, you see the thing that's going straight up that supports it all, and then there's the climb. You guys can see the steps, and they've got, I don't know how many flights you have to climb to sit in the caboose, but carrying Greg decide they want to go to the top, and then to the right walk out and get a picture taken. And she sent me the picture, and I just said, no, thank you. And that was her grandfather, Sam Walton, used to fly those planes, Carrie next to him, and he'd buzz over a Walmart in Arkansas, and that meant that he was stopping to check on the store, and everyone in the store had to get their together. Like you had, I don't know how much time it is between when he lands the plane and when he arrives, but you were cleaning up aisles. And so they talked about when they heard a plane fly over a Walmart back then, like all broke loose, and they were, the boss was coming in to look at things. But it's pretty amazing what these guys do. And what's more impressive is how quickly this is. I know it's on schedule, and it's hard to be on schedule with projects like that. But it's exciting, and I remember when I first got hired, we were in discussion, and Greg had asked George and I, about this building, and I think the feeling was, do you remodel or do you build new? And in New Orleans, we went through a remodel, and there was space for that. The road behind us and the fields in front of us kind of restrict the space relative to, you guys have been in the locker room, all right? And the rosters have gotten bigger, so that locker room has gotten extremely small. And when you do an open locker room in this facility, it'll be 3 times to 4 times bigger than the current one. So the decision was made then to move forward with a new facility, and all that dirt that was on that hill, there was something kind of nice about, not bleachers, but a large space where fans could watch practice. That's all. If you ever look, it's all stored behind all of this, and when this comes down, they're going to build that same mound with like a little cover on this side. So the master plan it's pretty extensive, and it's a great credit to Greg and Carrie and their vision, not just short term, but for years to come. And I think this building, how old did we say it was now? 90. So 90, and how old is it then? 30. Yeah, so it's had a good run. And you made the point, and there have been a lot of championships and wins in this building, and I think even the players before us will be excited to see, the new structure, and it's not a new location, and their ability to just attach it to the indoor, and so it took a while. I know they spent a lot of time going to other facilities, and before they came up with these plans, and I think all of us, including you guys, will appreciate it.
Sean, in an earlier response, you were going over situational football, and you said, hey, analytically, XYZ. How have you maybe warmed up or evolved on analytics through the years from the start of your career, and what kind of standing does it have on game day compared to your gut?
Yeah, I think let's talk about a few things. It's not new at all to personnel. The late Al Davis analytically looked at height, weight, size, speed, hand size, arm length at certain positions, and developed what was a typing or prototyping system. And so to this day, we type and prototype each position group. And there's certain standards, or they prototype. There's a prototype corner. There's a prototype quarterback, prototype left tackle. And so that, in essence, was a beginning of an analytical approach to what wins in our league. And then I think the common fan thinks of analytics as going forward on 4th down or 2-point plays, but there's so much more. There's so much more to that. And so, when Moneyball came out, it was a pitcher and a batter, and that was interesting. I was asked once at the Combine by a young front office executive about a drive we had in St. Louis where I chose to kick a field goal instead of go for it. And I asked him, I said, were you paying attention to the left tackle? We had a young left tackle, and Robert Quinn, the pass rusher, sacked Breeze 3 times, sacked fumble, almost tore his head off on another play. And that has to factor into in-game analytics. And so, has the game changed that way? Yes. And yet, that can't trump instincts, though. And we'll go through situations, that NFC Championship game with Detroit and San Francisco, the half began. Detroit's up 17. San Francisco marched down the field 3 points, ate up half the third quarter. Detroit answered, marched down the field, and I know Dan well, and they have a choice of kicking the field goal or going for it. Now, if they kick the field goal, most of the third quarter's expired, and the game is still at 17 points. If you go for it, which they did, and they didn't convert. So I think we're much further along relative to certain decisions. There's still a chart relative to 2-point, and I'm mindful of it. If it's a low-scoring game, I might apply that chart a little earlier. If it's a higher-scoring game, I won't even look at it until the fourth quarter. But I would say where it's most valuable, in my opinion, to us, is the procurement of talent. And it's the Bo Nix, 1 in every 82 plays having a fumble, interception, or sack, and analytically comparing that over 30 years, and then doing studies on sacks or studies on fumbles. And we have a receiver every year we look at who's 5'11", 160 pounds, and then Tony, I'll say, put up the last 30 years of receivers under the weight of 165 pounds. And when the list goes up, you look at it and then you say, all right, are we in that business? And so the personnel side of things, it's extremely valuable. We prototype players at positions, and running backs don't have any height requirements, but if they're short, we want them short, not small. R.J. Harvey, you wouldn't say he's small. You'd say he's short. And so each position, there's certain things that we're looking for. But clearly in 2025, it's different in game, and yet you can't lose track of, man, what's going on. And how are we running it? How are we, what's going on can have a big impact on moving your analytical needle, if that makes any sense.
If you were looking back at a decision in game that maybe didn't go the way you wanted to, what would you regret more? That you didn't trust your instinct, or that you didn't trust what the maybe analytics said about it?
Well, the worst was calling the wrong play because my eyes didn't see the number on the call sheet, and we ran a handoff against the Vikings in a 2-minute drill, 3rd and 9, and it ended up looking like a brilliant call. That would be the low end. We had cataract surgery that off season. I look, the one that's always difficult is, the challenge, throw the flag. You don't get the information, and teams are so good at getting to the line of scrimmage, and there's a good chance you haven't seen it on the screen. At home you might see it. On the road, they're not required this year to show it. It's new. But now, in the meantime, Hawkeye and what you have in your booth is much more advanced. I don't think that has anything to do with analytics. But that what can be challenged and what can't be is changing every year, and so I think I've been lucky enough to have been blessed with good instincts and trust those, and look, you're not always right when you're making a decision, but I don't lay awake with 2-point. The key is having the plays you like that you want to run. But what can happen is if I love a 2-point play, all right, and I'm first and goal on the 3, and I'm calling that play. I'm not saving a great 2-point play when I can score 6 with it. And so sometimes you run through a few of those, and as soon as the play's run, you're checking it off, and then you're saying, all right, what's our first go-to, but yeah, I think in game there are times where the game ends and I know better. We always have that part of the meeting, win or lose. If we played the opponent again next weekend, what would we have done different? We ask ourselves that every Monday morning. All right, what would we have done different? And I think that's important as a teacher to really be self-critical and try to improve that way. Not like you might play the team again, but just. And then oftentimes, here's the biggest thing: you spend all week with your game plan, and then you see a defense that's going to play a certain style that maybe you haven't seen on film, and it's quickly then you're adjusting to maybe what you hadn't practiced at all. But that happened a lot with Breeze, and I think it happens a lot when the quarterback talent goes higher. In the Super Bowl, we had a first half game plan for Manning and a second half game plan for Manning, and he was too good if you just stayed in the same. So that can come to your quarterback as he gets better with respect to his abilities. And I think that preparing for in-game, we all have an idea how a game might go, but man, there's a lot of times they go completely different than you expect, and then you better quickly understand how the game's going. And those are some things you learn, I think, just through experience.